The keys were cool against my palm, their weight both foreign and reassuring. I stood just inside the doorway of my new craftsman bungalow, the faint scent of fresh paint mingling with the sharp, clean air drifting in from the street. Afternoon light spilled through the wide front windows, brushing the hardwood floors in gold. I let the door swing shut behind me and walked slowly through the living room, fingertips grazing the polished wood of the staircase railing. Each step I took felt like proof this was mine. My name on the deed, my money in the bank, my choice to be here. 9 years earlier, I would have called my mother to share news like this. She would have told me to take pictures, to describe every detail, and I would have heard pride in her voice. But 9 years ago was before the invitations stopped coming, before the vague excuses and the unanswered calls, before holidays turned into carefully curated gatherings where I no longer existed. That history lingered here, invisible but present, like a faint draft in an otherwise warm room. Buying this house wasn't just about square footage or curb appeal, it was a line in the sand. I had built this without them, in the space they'd left empty when they decided my absence didn't matter. I crossed into the kitchen, resting the keys on the granite counter. The silence wrapped around me in a way that didn't feel lonely. It felt deliberate, chosen. I imagined the coming weeks arranging the furniture, filling the cabinets, planting herbs in the little patch of backyard. This was a beginning I'd carved out for myself, without permission or approval. What I didn't imagine, what I couldn't fully prepare for, was how quickly they would find a way to invade it. There was a time when I was the one who made our family gatherings happen. Thanksgiving menus, Christmas decor, even the silly 4th of July games weaving everyone's preferences into something that felt effortless was my specialty. I called weeks ahead to coordinate, made lists, and made sure everyone's favorite dish was on the table. Back then, it felt like we were a unit. The change was slow, so subtle I didn't notice at first. One Thanksgiving, Lenora told me they were keeping it simple that year, just a few people. The next Christmas, my calls about the dinner time went unanswered until the day after. Soon, every holiday came with vague responses. We're not sure of the plans yet, or it might just be small this time. Eventually, there were no calls at all. Lenora, my mother, had always cared most about appearances. Her version of family was polished and flattering, something you could show off without blemish. I suspect I stopped fitting that picture. My father, Gerald, avoided conflict so completely he acted as though my absence was a scheduling fluke, even after years of it. Darren, my older brother, had a competitive streak that turned even small successes into contests he needed to win. And Sienna, my younger sister, carried herself like she was naturally entitled to more space, more attention, more of everything. I kept trying sending texts, leaving voicemails, asking outright if I could stop by. At first, they'd respond with polite surprise when I appeared anyway, the kind of brittle welcome you give a stranger who stayed too long. Over time, even that disappeared. By the 5th year, I realized I was the only one keeping a finger on the thread that connected us. By the 9th, I couldn't tell if that thread still existed at all, and then came the day that proved it hadn't for a long time. It was the second Sunday in May, and I had convinced myself it would be different that year. I'd called 3 days ahead, told Lenora I wanted to bring her flowers and spend some time together. Her voice had been polite, but flat. Oh, well, okay. Yes. Come by. I ignored the hesitation. I wanted to believe the gesture would matter. I chose lilies, her favorite, the kind that opened slowly over several days. They cost more than I should have spent, but I told myself this was worth it. I wore the soft green dress she'd once said made my eyes look brighter, as if that could tip the day toward something good. The 45-minute drive to their house was filled with small, hopeful rehearsals of what I'd say when she opened the door. But when I pulled into the driveway, the curtains were drawn, and the porch was empty. I rang the bell, waited, rang again. The lilies trembled in my grip as the spring breeze carried the scent of cut grass. I called her phone. Voicemail. Gerald's phone. Voicemail. Darren. Sienna. Nothing. I stood there for 15 minutes before the truth began to settle in my chest like wet cement. The drive back felt longer. I placed the lilies in a vase on my kitchen table, their beauty almost mocking in the silence. I told myself something urgent must have happened, an emergency, a sudden change of plans. That night, I scrolled through my phone, needing proof of anything but rejection. It didn't take long to find it. There they were, Lenora, Gerald, Darren, and Sienna dressed in pastel spring outfits at a glossy downtown restaurant. The caption read, "Mother's Day brunch with the best family ever." A corsage of roses on Lenora's wrist. Not lilies. I stared at the screen until my eyes blurred. Below the flood of heart emojis and compliments, I saw Aunt Celine's comment, "Not everyone at the table." I see. Just vague enough to pass as casual, but sharp enough that I knew she understood. I didn't respond. I simply locked my phone, turned off the light, and sat in the dark, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, wondering when exactly my seat at the table had been cleared for good. It wasn't the last time they'd leave me out, but it was the day I stopped pretending I didn't notice. By the time December rolled around again, I'd trained myself to expect nothing, no calls, no texts, no vague invitations that would never materialize. But habits die hard, and that night, after a long day at work, I found myself scrolling through social media before bed. Sienna's post stopped me cold. A perfect Christmas tableau, Lenora and Gerald by the fireplace. Darren's kids in matching plaid pajamas. Sienna front and center holding a delicate gold bracelet toward the camera. The caption read, "Best Christmas ever with the fam." So grateful for these people. I stared at those words until the screen dimmed in my hand. 9 years. 9 years without a single holiday invite. And still, I'd been holding on to the faint hope that maybe this time would be different. I wasn't angry. Anger had burned itself out years ago. What settled in its place was something quieter, heavier clarity. I closed the app and opened my contacts. My thumb hovered for a moment before tapping Allison Greer's name. We hadn't spoken in months, but I could hear her smile even before she said hello. "Allison, remember how you always told me to call when I was ready to buy a house?" There was a beat of surprise, then warmth. "You're ready. I'm beyond ready." We talked numbers, neighborhoods, and timelines. All those years of skipped trips, no joint gifts, and no let's all pitch in expenses had added up, without realizing it. They'd funded my freedom. When we hung up, I sat back on my couch, the quiet around me suddenly different. Not the emptiness of being left out, but the stillness of standing at the start of something I controlled entirely. The next morning, I woke with a list in my head and a steadiness in my chest I hadn't felt in years. I was done waiting for an invitation. It was time to open my own door. House hunting turned out to be less intimidating than I'd imagined. Allison moved quickly, lining up showings in neighborhoods that matched my budget and my need for quiet. With no vacations, no group gifts, no endless family contributions over the years. My savings were better than I'd realized. The irony wasn't lost on me. Every holiday I'd been excluded from had quietly built my escape fund. We saw a few contenders' places with charm, but no soul, or good bones buried under decades of neglect. Then, one gray Saturday morning, Allison unlocked the door to a small craftsman bungalow on a tree-lined street. The moment I stepped inside, I felt it. Sunlight streamed through wide windows, warming the honey-colored floors. The living room flowed into a kitchen with gleaming counters and enough space for me to cook without feeling cramped. 2 bedrooms upstairs, one for sleeping, one for an office. Out back, a small patio framed by climbing roses and just enough yard to plant herbs in the spring. "This is it," I said, before we'd even finished the tour. I put in an offer that afternoon. It was accepted the next day. Within weeks, the paperwork was signed. The keys were mine, and I stood in that same bright kitchen with boxes stacked against the walls. That first night, I didn't unpack much. I set up a single armchair by the front window, opened a bottle of wine, and poured myself a glass. The quiet felt different here, cleaner, lighter, mine. I lifted the glass toward the empty room and said it out loud, just to hear the truth in it, to never needing their approval again. The words settled over me like a seal, closing off the years of hoping and replacing them with something far more valuable. And that was when I decided the first thing I'd do here was throw a party. Once the boxes were unpacked and the furniture settled into place, I started making a list not of chores or repairs, but of names, people who had shown up for me, in big ways and small. Friends from college who still called just to check in, colleagues who celebrated my wins, neighbors I'd already exchanged warm hellos with on the sidewalk. Aunt Celine was at the top, followed by cousins who had never made me feel like an afterthought. It felt good, creating a guest list without obligation. No shoulds, no unspoken rules about who had to be included, just the people I actually wanted to see. On the afternoon of the party, the house filled with voices and music. The front door swung open and shut in a steady rhythm as friends arrived with bottles of wine, dishes to share, and hugs that felt like home. In the kitchen, someone was laughing so hard they had to lean against the counter for support. The patio lights glowed against the dusk, framing clusters of people deep in conversation. It was everything my family gatherings never were: easy, genuine, without the constant undercurrent of comparison or performance. Aunt Celine found me refilling a bowl of chips and smiled. "Honey, this is a beautiful party," she said, her eyes sweeping over the crowded room. Then, more softly, "Where's your mother and the rest of them?" I met her gaze without hesitation. "I didn't invite them." Her brows lifted slightly. "Oh, did something happen?" "Yes," I said simply. "For the last 9 years, they haven't invited me to any family holidays or birthdays, so I decided not to invite them either." Celine's expression shifted surprise first, then something closer to resolve. I had no idea. I knew she'd tell the others. Celine was the quiet connector, the one who carried news along the family lines. This time, I wasn't afraid of the story she'd share. Let them hear it. Let them sit with it. The party stretched late into the evening, laughter spilling into every corner of my house. When the last guest left, I stood alone in the quiet, feeling lighter than I had in years. 3 days later, the storm arrived on my doorstep. The knock was sharp and insistent, more like a demand than a request. When I looked through the sidelight, all 4 of them stood there: Lenora, Gerald, Darren, and Sienna clustered together like an advancing unit. I opened the door only enough to speak. "What do you need?" Lenora brushed past me without answering, Gerald following close behind. Darren and Sienna trailed in, their eyes already scanning the place. It was as if my home were a crime scene they'd been called to investigate. "Nice kitchen," Darren said, running a hand along the counter in a way that felt less like a compliment and more like an audit. Sienna wandered the living room, picking up a small ceramic vase, turning it over, setting it down with a faint smirk. "Looks comfortable," she said. The pause waited. Lenora positioned herself in the center of the room, hands clasped like she was presiding over a hearing. "How could you do this to us? Maris, do you have any idea what you've done? Celine has been calling nonstop, and now everyone's asking why we treat you differently. They're acting like we made you an outsider." I leaned against the doorway to the hall, keeping my voice even. "Why haven't you invited me to a family gathering in 9 years? Silence. Gerald shifted uncomfortably, eyes on the floor. Lenora opened her mouth, then closed it again. "You don't even know where I work, do you?" I asked. More silence. They glanced at each other, but no one answered. "I've been in a senior role at my company for years. If you cared, you'd know that, but you never asked." Lenora's lips thinned. "Well, You never told us. I stepped toward the door and opened it wide. Time for you to leave. I've already done more for you than you ever did for me. At least I'm letting you walk out with dignity instead of leaving you on a porch with flowers on Mother's Day. Lenora's face flushed. And for once, she didn't have a comeback, one by one. They filed out, their indignation trailing behind them into the cold air. The quiet that followed was short-lived. A week later, Lenora came back alone. A week later. There was another knock, but softer this time. Through the glass, I saw only Lenora. She stood alone on the porch, her shoulders drawn in, the wind tugging at the hem of her coat. When I opened the door, her voice was careful. Maris, please, can we talk? I let her in, keeping my distance as she stepped into the living room. I know we haven't been good to you, she began, her tone edged with something that almost sounded like humility. I want to make it right. My birthday is coming up next week, and I'm planning a small dinner, just family. I'd like you to be there. The words landed heavier than I expected. Part of me wanted to shut it down immediately, but another part, one I thought I'd buried, still wanted to believe her. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Over the next few days, I found myself searching for the right gift. I settled on a silk scarf in a deep teal with delicate silver threads woven through elegant but understated, the kind of thing she could wear without feeling self-conscious. It cost more than I planned, but I told myself it was worth the gesture. 3 days before the dinner, Aunt Celine called. I just talked to your mom, she said, cheer in her voice. She told me the good news you're coming to her birthday party. Party, I asked, my grip tightening on the phone. Oh, yes. She's invited everyone, all the aunts, uncles, cousins. She says she wants to prove to everyone the family's back together. I sat in silence for a beat, the realization clicking into place. This wasn't about reconciliation, it was about optics. My presence was just another prop in her performance of perfection. That night, I folded the scarf back into its box and set it by the door, not to take with me, but to return. On the night of Lenora's party, I made myself dinner and stayed off my phone. The sky outside turned from pink to deep blue, and I imagined the hum of conversation filling some rented hall or a too-bright dining room. Around 7. My phone lit up with Aunt Celine's name. I answered. Maris. Where are you? She asked. Everyone's wondering. Then, muffled. Put her on speaker. A shift in the background told me my voice was now in the room with all of them. I took a breath. I want you all to know that when my mother invited me tonight, she told me it would be a small dinner, just immediate family. She didn't mention it was a party. She didn't mention she'd invited all of you. A ripple of murmurs moved through the line. For 9 years, I haven't been invited to a single holiday or birthday. Not once. And now she wants to pretend we're close so you'll all think everything's fine. It's not. So I won't be coming tonight, and I won't pretend anymore. I ended the call before anyone could respond. The next day, Celine stopped by. Over coffee. She described the aftermath. You could have heard a pin drop. Then people started asking questions why you weren't at Christmas, why you missed Thanksgiving. Your mom said you were always busy with work. Valerie asked where you worked. Nobody could answer. By the time the cake came out, most of the chairs were empty. I didn't feel triumphant. What I felt was steadiness, a weight lifted that I hadn't realized I was still carrying. The silence from my family lasted only a few days before they tried again. In the weeks that followed, I heard from Celine that a few relatives had quietly started distancing themselves from Lenora and Gerald. Some stopped answering their calls. Others made polite excuses to avoid gatherings. It wasn't my doing, it was theirs. The calls and emails from my immediate family came in waves at first, then in drips. I didn't respond. I'd already said what needed saying, and repeating it wouldn't change who they were. Instead, I turned my focus to the life I was building. Work was thriving. I landed a new client that challenged me in the best ways. I deepened the friendships that had stood the test of absence, people who showed up without keeping score. And, almost unexpectedly, I started seeing Adrian, a quiet, sharp-witted man from my book club who listened more than he spoke and remembered small details like how I take my coffee. When September came, so did my birthday. For the first time in years, I didn't brace for disappointment. I hosted a dinner on the patio string lights overhead, good wine on the table, laughter spilling into the cool night. The people there weren't related to me by blood, but they had shown up for me over and over again. As I blew out the candles, I realized I didn't feel the hollow ache I used to. The absence of my family didn't feel like a wound anymore. It felt like space I'd filled with people who valued me without conditions. My life wasn't perfect, but it was honest, and it was mine. I looked around the table, at the faces lit by the glow of the lights, and thought I got the better deal.